Remember I had to defrag your hard drive? And those little big, okay, I want to defrag the room. If you're on this side of the room, and there's an empty seat to your right, please move to the right. Everyone can see you, so overcome that weird introversion and make some room because there's a ton of people in the back. If you're on this side, move to the right if there's an empty seat, and that's recursive. If you're on this side, you can guess the instructions. On this side, if there's an empty seat, s'il y a une chaise à côté de vous, à votre gauche, de ce côté-là, qui est vide, déplacez-vous vers le centre. All the people come on, there's tons of people at the back who are standing because you're rude and insensitive. So move into the middle. I know you wanted to save that sweet, sweet edge chair. Just think of yourselves as defragging the room. Okay, take the fragmentation out, get in the middle. If I see an empty seat, I'm going to make fun of you. Those of you at the back, come on around. There's a bunch of seats up here. Don't be shy. I'm a bad comedian, so I won't heckle you in the front row. Okay, come on. There's a few more spaces up here. Right. Bonjour tout le monde. Comme a dit Julia, je suis montréalais, entrepreneur, auteur. Je travaille beaucoup sur l'intersection de la technologie et la société. Et je vais faire mon possible de faire une présentation un peu franglais, mais la plupart des slides sont en anglais. Si ça vous fâche, n'hésitez pas de crier après moi sur Twitter. Me voici comment me rejoindre. A few years ago, I launched a company in Montreal called Coradiant with the help of some of the people in this room, actually, several of the folks from CloudOps. And we built a very deep web performance management system for operators. A few years later, we started an accelerator here in Montreal called Year One Labs. The idea was to apply some of the lean startup ideas to startup environments and an accelerator. And then I wrote a book called Complete Web Monitoring about how to measure your performance online, lean analytics. These days, I run a lot of conferences. So I'm the content chair for Startup Fest. I chair Strata and Hadoop World, which is the big O'Reilly data conference, and a new digital government conference called Forward 50. I'm here to talk to you about why the world needs DevOps. If you want to take notes, this is how to convince your boss to give you a raise or pay more attention to you or whatever else. Please, if you want some seats, there's about 10 up here and a few on the left there. So this is the average lifespan of a company on the Standard & Poor's 500 index in the last few years. If companies were people, and unlike America, some of us think they aren't, if companies, come on, that's a Citizens United joke this early in the morning. If companies were people, this would be a pandemic similar to the Spanish flu. The average company lasted 70 years, now it lasts 15. And to deal with this, companies tend to try to innovate in different ways. The smart ones do. They have what's called sustaining innovation, which is like do more of the same, give the customers what they asked for, only more. They have adjacent innovation, which is where they change the product, they change the market they're in, or they change their go-to-market method. They have disruptive innovation, where they build something that destroys an earlier business model. And then there's this idea of discontinuous innovation. And this is the really weird one, because discontinuous innovation is unknowable. And if that sounds esoteric, let me make it easy for you. Sustaining innovation is just doing your job. Adjacent innovation is building something new. Disruptive innovation is destroying something. Discontinuous innovation is a fundamental change in the world. Don't worry, not all my slides have this much writing on them. So here's a concrete example. If you're Mercedes-Benz and you launch the 2019 Mercedes-Benz, it's a darker black, it has extra cup holders, that's sustaining innovation. If you introduce an electric car, that's adjacent innovation. You're still selling to drivers, and you're still selling through dealerships. If you decided to sell your traditional car through a web-based ordering system, that would also be adjacent. You've changed one thing, the go-to-market strategy. Mercedes-Benz owns Car2Go. Car2Go is disruptive because the more people use Car2Go, the fewer people buy Mercedes-Benz cars. So they've changed many parts of their product and their offering, but they've also started to cannibalize their old business. And self-driving cars are what we would call discontinuous innovation. We can't understand what that's going to be like. So a discontinuous innovation would be like, you used to drive to work? How did you shave? Like it just won't make sense, right? I hate the word disruptive. So I'm going to spend more time talking about why this stuff is interesting. Because the technology itself isn't interesting. What fascinates me is discontinuities. Changes where the world becomes unknowable after them. Foucault said that a discontinuity is a period where things are no longer perceived, classified, or known in the same way. It's a fundamental change in how we think about the world. It's like a mental singularity. Consider agriculture, for example. Farming was the result of the calendar, understanding of germination and irrigation and so on, but it gave us many other things. Because we had lots of food, we could start to invest in education. Because we had monoculture, I grew potatoes and you grew carrots, we could trade, and that led to modern business. It meant that the land where you could grow things was now valuable, which led to a noble class that was owning and protecting villagers. And agriculture today is in the middle of a second discontinuity. If you didn't know it, farming automation is transformative. 70% of North Americans used to work on a farm. It's now less than 1%. It's not just North America. This chart is shocking. In China, 1995, you had 45% of the world in China, 45% of China farming. It's now down to around 10% in like 20 years. This is a complete change in the landscape. Now, I know you didn't come to a DevOps conference to talk about farming, so I better bring this home. In 1800, only 3% of people lived in urban areas. Today, 75% of people in developed nations. And we've seen these kind of discontinuities before. Gutenberg invented the printing press, but the printing press had these cascade effects. So the printing press led to cheap books and new topics, and ultimately it led to democracy. The radio changed how quickly we could get messages out to a large number of people. The telescope showed us our place in the universe. And it's not just technologies. When we realized the Earth wasn't flat, that was pretty transformative. And when we say something today like, I can't imagine my world without a smartphone, that means we've had a discontinuity. We don't really understand what the world was like on the other side. So the reason that businesses are dying in the numbers we've seen is that we have a discontinuity of business models today. This is where we are today as a competitive economy. Competition once upon a time was slow, and it was at arm's length. It's easy to forget this, but like a new product took a year to succeed or fail. You'd launch it, and you'd see what happened, and a year later, the salespeople would come back and say, I can't sell this, and the company would iterate and so on. Excuse me. If you wanted to find out what a competitor was up to, you couldn't just Google them. You went and pretended to hire a competitor's sales force to research their business model and their pricing. Control of the communications channels by a few large printing organizations and broadcast stations gave us the ability to shape the conversation. I love this Motorola ad, how television benefits your children. We had private responses to individuals. We didn't yell at one another loudly in front of the world on Twitter. And we literally had humans running the back office instead of machines. But we've undergone a massive shift in the last 20 years. And because we're in it, it's hard to see. Because we've moved from atoms to bits. I talked to Kate O'Riordan, the head of product at Shazam, and she told me that Lady Gaga and Katy Perry both launched a song at the same time in Europe. Within hours, they knew which people were Shazamming the song. And this meant that they could very quickly predict which of those two tracks was going to do well. Within hours of release, the marketing company was pumping money into Katy Perry's song, but not into Lady Gaga's. Within hours. It used to be you'd sit by the radio and wait for that song you wanted and press record, and you'd phone it in, and then the phone in. Like now, it's just someone presses their phone and says, "What song is this?" That's transformative. We can communicate effortlessly at scale. I could take a video of you and put it on the internet, and millions of people would watch it. What's astonishing is not just that they would watch it for free, but that the person making the video gets paid. Think about that. We don't pay to broadcast information. If people consume our information, we get paid. This video is, which I'm not going to show you, because I don't have a command line interface to open up my videos like some of you. This video literally is a plastic egg that someone's opening, taking out the item, putting it back, putting it aside for 10 minutes. It's got 652 million views. You think you're smart. This person made a house. They literally made enough money to buy a house for a 10-minute video of opening eggs, which explains why everybody's kids wanted Hatchimals last year. And while we take it for granted in our personal lives this technology change has happened, we haven't really applied it in business. Sustaining organizations focus on a business plan. When you're looking at adjacent innovation, you're asking, can I change the business model? A disruptive innovation is a business idea. You got to see if it works. And a discontinuous innovation is like a possible future. We don't know what it's going to be. So I think it's time for big companies to adapt, because the best companies automate everything. Amazon has a robotic supply chain. Deep Knowledge Ventures has algorithms sitting on the board. Autodesk is using AI to power design, and so on. But there's a big problem. because technology on its own does not produce better outcomes. It's easy to see the technology changes, the latest three-letter acronym or weird animal name out of the Hadoop ecosystem. But those don't actually produce things. The consequences of those technologies are not so easy to see. So I'm going to make one bet, which is, what does success look like? I think that what's key today is we are in an era where we have ended economies of scale. Once upon a time, scale was king, right? If you could corner the market on something, then you could manipulate the legislators and the resources and the supply chain. You could train people on your tools. You could get economies of scale. Daniel McCallum, it was a Civil War engineer who then started running railroads after the Civil War in the States. And his railroads were about 50 miles long. And he noticed once the railroads got longer than 50 miles, everything went wrong. Confusion, chaos, delays, and so on. So he took some of his military knowledge and he built the world's first org chart. If you hate your job, it's probably McCallum's fault. Zooming into the beauty of his org chart, this is what McCallum's org chart looked like. It's kind of a work of art. It's not really Visio. But McCallum is the person who said we should put people in boxes with roles and create hierarchies because it allows us to scale. The employee is in a box with a role, and that's repetition, and that's formality, and it gives us predictability and process. Scale comes from process, from IP, from org chart, standardization, capitalization, all that kind of stuff. All of these decisions about economies of scale come from an underlying assumption that the future will be just like the past, only more so. Today, however, scale is in many cases an anchor. If you look at Fortune 500 companies, we saw Standard & Poor 500, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company has also gone from 75 years down to 15 years. The amount of time someone can expect to be on that. The scary part is if you try to enter a new business, the corporate strategy board says you're 95% likely to fail. And Clay Christensen, probably the most quoted person on innovation, says there's a 99% chance. So you're doomed and you can't innovate your way out of it. I think the answer is adaptivity, because adaptivity is how you beat scale. And we've already got examples of this. We see what happens when the taxi industry, instead of deciding to build a simple app that would let you hail a taxi, focused all their energy on legislation and on anchoring and tipping incentives. We see what happens when Tesla wants the future to be here sooner. Elon Musk is building cars that are fully ready for self-driving, but what nobody realizes is that when you buy a Tesla Model 3, there's a little disclaimer in the license agreement that says you may not use this car on Lyft or Uber. You may only use it on the Tesla network. So I was speaking with Transport Canada a few weeks ago. I said, does anybody here know what the Tesla network is? They said, no. You're not buying a car from Elon Musk. You're buying a timeshare in a self-driving fleet and giving it somewhere to park. And when you get home from the day, you'll flip a switch and it'll go drive. Elon is busy reframing things. Admittedly, he needs some more sleep. He's a little crazy right now. But fundamentally, he is reimagining what that could be like. The legacy, the taxi cab industry, for example, wants to preserve the current state. Obviously, it's got Lyft and Uber tackling it, but the reality is that the future is these shared resources that we pool. And we see this behavior in startups because startups adapt to the world and they make the world adapt to themselves. But big organizations have a much harder time doing this. So the way I think a big organization needs to adapt to this is by sensing, deciding, and acting. If you look at a very simple organism like the roundworm, this organism exhibits some extremely basic properties. It senses food or a mate or safety. It moves towards it, it consumes it, reproduces or hides in it, and it keeps going. This is kind of the life cycle of a simple organism. A more advanced creature does this, but it also provokes its environment. So it makes a change and sees what happens. It can learn, it can experiment. And I think this is a model for how organizations need to compete in an era of digital innovation rather than atoms. Because organizations are organisms too, and technology fundamentally changes this. We go from research, analysis, gut feel, to wearables, IoT, sensors, the industrial internet, all these sources of data. Once upon a time, a CEO could say, I didn't know about that. They didn't have to reveal earnings until the end of the quarter. Today, it is almost impossible for a CEO of a big company to deny knowledge of something because there's so much sensing and so much analytics that changes the accountability of the boardroom. deciding used to be I'd pay a strategic consultant a lot of money to come in and consult for me, and then if something went wrong, I could blame them. Today, we have deep learning, we have machine algorithms, we have technology that can make predictions and look in data for better insights and so on. So the way we decide has fundamentally changed. And obviously, if you get a computer and you give it some data, it will get better very quickly. This is an example of Breakout. In this case, the AI was given only the score and the pixels on the screen, and within 3 hours, it learned to play Breakout better than the game's creators. So if you think it isn't coming for your job, think again. I believe that in the near future, to avoid, to be able to afford liability insurance for executives, you will have to have an algorithm, because all the data that's being collected by a company is going to have to be processed in a way that executives can look at it in real time. And then, of course, there's acting. Today you have processes, automation, you have McCallum's org chart that enforces roles, and tomorrow you're going to have automation and robots. If you think this isn't coming for you, realize that JP Morgan just deployed software that does things in seconds. It used to consume 360,000 billable hours. This is a fundamental change in every industry. It's not just blue-collar jobs, it's white-collar jobs. Pretty much the only industry that's less likely to be affected is what are called pink-collar jobs, so empathetic jobs like nursing and so on. So I think there's this massive technological shift underway in how we sense, decide, and act as organizations. And that means IT is the central nervous system. So to go back to evolution, what does that activity look like? The first thing is organizations generally use lean startup approaches. And the core of lean is this idea of iteration. You're going to build something, put it in the market, measure what happened, and build what you should have built in the first place, and just keep iterating. Startups know this because a startup founder searches around like they're lost, and once they find that product market fit, they bring in execution. And so organizations need to embrace this kind of uncertain searching as they try to discover new business processes. And it's not just small organizations. GE implemented lean startup methods. It managed to get the time it designs a fridge down from 5 years to 6 months. Pro tip, it used to take 5 years to design a fridge. DARPA had a problem with innovation, so they created this thing called the Defense Innovation Unit X that would do rapid prototyping of things like bulletproof vests. So this is happening all over the place. But this needs continuous iteration. The second thing you're going to do is put analytics everywhere. I'm not sure if the audio will work on this, but we'll find out. Many of you might have seen this. This is a video of a Tesla car detecting an accident. So if you can't hear the beep, I'll tell you when it beeps. Oh yeah, we can hear it. So let's count how long the Tesla knew something was going to happen before the human did. Fortunately, everybody in this accident was okay. But with that kind of, everyone says, ooh, a self-driving car had a crash. With that kind of technology underway, it is soon going to be impossible not to use an algorithm, not to use technology, because the liability to do it by hand will be too high. Think about how many thousands of lives autopilot has saved on airplanes. Every industry is going to sober up and say, I can't not do this. I can't afford the insurance to do it by hand. Humans are terrible at recording things. The side effect of what you just saw is that all of that was documented in ways that could be analyzed afterwards. Machines have no choice but to take notes. There's an MIT study in 2011 that shows that companies that use data-driven analytics and decision-making instead of gut feel are 5 to 6% more competitive a year. If you compound that over 7 years, one's a market leader, the other is out of business. The third thing you need to do is have adaptive attributes. I have my own video for what CloudOps looks like, for what DevOps looks like. But essentially here you're spinning up and spinning down machines and logistics and workforces and moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx model because you're using tools instead of limbs. This is that organizational organism saying, I don't need to grow an extra limb, I now need to use tools. And I can pick up and put down tools as they're needed. That's a very different way of thinking. In the old days, you would hire a new left arm. Now that arm gets a tool, it can be more specialized. And of course, you need to deliver this stuff continuously, which kind of feels like this. Continuous delivery is the key to all this because how fast the organism evolves, like a fruit fly evolving fast because it has a short gestation period. How fast an organization can iterate and learn, how often you can compound information matters a lot. The organization that continually deploys and robustly manages new products and new services and new markets iterates quickly. It's this cycle between operations, development, and QA happening faster and faster. So the one measure of corporate competitiveness is how quickly can an organism or an organization go through these cycles or these iterations. And that's what I would call DevOps, is the center of this. It's spinning up that cycle faster than anyone else. So to recap, both businesses and consumers have moved from atoms to bits. Economies of scale are now a liability because an economy of scale impedes adaptivity. The bigger and more rigorous your org chart position, the harder it is for you to innovate and to change and to adapt and take responsibility for things that are outside your box. And like organisms, organizations need to sense and decide and act because adaptivity yields competitive advantage. Adaptivity is the cure to this massive disease that is destroying most of corporate economies. Adaptivity comes from continuous delivery, meaning concurrent development, testing, and deployment. It comes from on-demand resources, infrastructure, applications, physical and virtual resources, and workforces even, humans that you can spin up and tear down because they're available through on-demand services. It comes from real-time data, high volumes of varied information being analyzed in real time and used to augment human cognition. And it comes from lean startup approaches, this strategy that you're going to deploy, iterate, and learn, and that the perfect is the enemy of good enough, that your job is to search for a new business model. This means your role as IT is neuroscientist, because if this is an organism, then technologists are the spine and the nervous system. When you look at stuff like Amazon's rapid growth, that's a consequence of them understanding this. That's a consequence of Jeff Bezos saying a 2-pizza team can be agile. There's a very small group that builds S3, but the entire internet stands on top of S3. If S3 gets faster, everything gets faster. So Bezos' insight that you should build these small 2-pizza teams and iterate fast leads to the consequences that we want out there. The problem is that IT is often seen inefficiently. Many large organizations, the CIO is rewarded for the cost per employee of IT. So their job is to get the cost of technology per employee down as low as possible. That's a common business metric. How many people here have worked for an organization where the IT department had an incentive, they were measured on how much is the cost of providing IT per employee? So in large enterprises, this is a pretty standard thing. It's completely wrong. Because if your goal is to augment humans with computer cognition, to reduce workforces and increase automation, to increase agility, to be more adaptive, you kind of want to spend as much as possible on IT per employee. Because then you're investing in technology to augment and amplify those workers. And by the way, that's how you justify a new computer to your boss. So I think that what we're really here to talk about is that it's time to end this 50-year fight in IT and technology between the role of engineering, which is make things change. You're rewarded for making things change, and the role of operations, which is to make things predictable. These are fundamentally opposing. It's like the Bud Light tastes great, less filling ads. These two people that are arguing, and we're not sure why, because they both want the same thing. That's kind of IT or engineering and operations. And to fix those and to reconcile them, we need to tell both groups that your job is to pursue adaptivity. Because technology is no longer a cost of doing business, it is the business. And I think adaptivity is the difference between being an apex predator and being part of the food chain. So with that, I think that's about it. If you want to yell at me, you can do so on Twitter, and hopefully I didn't go too far over time, so you can get back on clock. Thank you all very much. Have an amazing 2 days here. And just remember, everything you're doing is about organizational adaptivity. That's what the business needs in order to survive this incredible dying of corporations. And to do that, we have to throw off the shackles of hundreds of years of management theory and the understanding of economies of scale and the idea of predictability in the market. So it's a hard fight, but this is the best way to start it. Thank you.